A great woman singed and shocked everyone when she said that. Welcome, dear listener, to a heartwarming tale of love, dreams, and second chances. Tonight, we'll embark on the inspiring journey of Mary Anderson, a woman who, at 68, defies the odds to pursue her lifelong passion for singing. Through her story, you'll witness how love, determination, and the courage to dream can bring people closer together and transform lives. Since she was a 14-year-old girl, Mary Anderson has cherished in her heart the dream of becoming a great singer. In every dark corner of her small house, her singing voice rang out softly like a whisper of hope. But it seemed that no one believed in that dream, not even her closest loved ones. People told Mary that it was just a youthful impulse, that she was not talented enough to conquer the world with her voice. That made her sad, but not enough to make her give up. Despite the lack of support, Mary never stopped dreaming. Life passed, and as time passed, the responsibilities weighed heavily on her shoulders, causing that dream to recede, fading from memory. But the important thing was that Mary never forgot. Inside her, that passion still burned quietly, waiting for an opportunity to ignite it again. Now, at 68, Mary stands on the threshold of a new chapter in her life. After years of hard work and family burdens, she has become a widow living alone in the suburbs of Dallas. The small house, with its old walls and quiet streets, reflects the deep loneliness she has endured for a decade since her husband passed away. With a small pension, Mary lives a lonely life, and all hope in life seems far away. Her children are now grown, have their own lives, and are gradually distancing themselves from their mother. They have come to see her as an old woman who has fulfilled her role, having raised them, protected them, and now just living out her remaining days in peace. But what they do not know is that inside Mary, the dream of becoming a singer still burns. The only thing that keeps that dream alive is her 10-year-old granddaughter, Lily. Lily was a passionate, curious, and loving little girl. Whenever she visited her grandmother, Lily would sit at Mary's feet, her eyes wide open, filled with admiration as she listened to her grandmother sing old songs. To Lily, Mary was more than just an old grandmother. In her eyes, she was a star waiting to be discovered, and that was why she came up with a bold idea. When a large-scale talent search competition was held in the state of Texas, with a prize of $110,000, Lily was the first to suggest that Mary participate. At first, the idea seemed crazy. Mary had lived most of her life without ever standing on a professional stage. But for Lily, it was not only a chance to win a large sum of money, but also a chance for her grandmother to fulfill a dream she had cherished for decades. However, the road to the competition was not easy. With a small pension, Mary couldn't even afford the trip into town to audition. Sitting alone in her small room, staring at her old TV, Mary faced an important choice. One night, she said to Lily, "I'm going to sell this TV." Mary's voice was firm, but her heart was uncertain. Lily looked at her in confusion. "But Grandma, what are we going to watch movies on?" Mary smiled gently, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We're going to make new memories, honey. Besides, this is what I need to do." With that decision, Mary sold her TV, which had brought her comfort for so many years. Although it only brought in a small amount of money, it was enough to cover her first trip into town for the audition. The day she put on her simple, worn-out blue dress and boarded the train into town, Mary felt both nervous and excited. She had embarked on a journey to fulfill a dream she had longed for all her life. Mary was not competing with other contestants. For her, this was not a race between young talents. This was a battle with herself, with the 14-year-old girl inside her who had dreamed of standing on stage, and with Lily, who had always believed in and supported her throughout this long and challenging journey. That day, as the train carried Mary to the city, her thoughts were filled with both excitement and apprehension. The journey wasn't just a physical trip, but also an emotional one, tracing back through decades of dreams that had been sidelined. The memories of her younger self, full of hope and ambition, came rushing back to her as she gazed out of the window. The scenery of life seemed to blur past her, and with each passing moment, Mary was reminded of how far she had come, and yet how much farther she had to go. Despite the excitement of finally taking steps toward her dream, doubt still loomed. After all, she was no longer the young, hopeful girl she once was. Life had taken its toll, leaving her with aching bones and a weary heart. But there was something more powerful than her doubt: love. Mary wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for Lily, her granddaughter, whose belief in her was unwavering. Every time she felt fear creeping in, the image of Lily's wide, trusting eyes reminded her of why she was doing this. Lily had always been the one person who saw beyond Mary's age and weariness. To Lily, her grandmother was a star, waiting to be discovered. Lily had been Mary's greatest support throughout this journey, her youthful optimism rekindling the fire of a dream long thought forgotten. Every evening, after the quiet settled in their modest home, the two of them would sit together. Mary would hum old melodies, and Lily would listen with wide-eyed admiration. It was in these moments, bathed in the warmth of their shared love, that Mary felt her soul come alive again. That love, the bond between them, was the driving force behind everything Mary was about to do. The city loomed large as Mary arrived at the theater, an imposing reminder of how far she was from the quiet streets of her life near Dallas. As she stepped inside, the air buzzed with excitement, filled with young, polished contestants, each one brimming with confidence. Mary felt a wave of insecurity wash over her. She didn't have fancy costumes, vocal coaches, or the brash energy of youth. All she had was her lived experience, her stories of love, loss, and resilience. And in that moment, Mary realized that what she brought to the stage was something even more precious: authenticity. Sitting in the corner of the busy theater, waiting for her name to be called, Mary clutched her sheet music tightly. The doubt returned, louder this time. She thought about how out of place she must look, a 68-year-old woman among a sea of fresh-faced talent. But then, just as the doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she saw Lily in her mind's eye, smiling and confident. That image grounded her. Mary took a deep breath, reminding herself that this performance wasn't about winning or losing. It was about proving to herself and to Lily that it was never too late to follow your dreams. When her name was called, Mary felt a familiar rush of nerves, but she squared her shoulders and stepped onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her momentarily, but she steadied herself, closing her eyes for a brief moment as the music began to play. The melody was soft, comforting, like an old friend. Mary opened her mouth, and with that first note, all her fears melted away. She wasn't just singing notes, she was telling a story, her story. Her voice, though weathered by time, carried the depth of every emotion she had ever felt: love, loss, heartache, and triumph. The audience sat in silence, their eyes fixed on her. To them, she might have seemed like an unexpected contestant, but as her song filled the room, it became clear that this was more than just a performance. It was a declaration of who she was: a woman who had lived, who had loved, and who had never given up. For Mary, it wasn't about impressing the judges. It was about showing Lily and herself that dreams were worth chasing, no matter how long it took to reach them. The final note of Mary's performance still hung in the air, fragile and lingering like a memory long cherished. Her chest rose and fell heavily as she stood there, catching her breath. The stage lights dimmed slightly, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Mary waited, heart pounding in her ears, for any sign of response from the audience. In the silence, doubt began to creep back in. Had she done enough? Was her voice, worn by age and experience, strong enough to compete with the youthful talent that surrounded her? But then, slowly at first, the applause began. It started with a single pair of hands clapping somewhere in the darkness beyond the stage. Then another, and another. The sound grew, swelling into a wave of thunderous approval that filled the entire theater. The noise enveloped Mary, drowning out the insecurities that had plagued her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she gazed out into the crowd, momentarily blinded by the intensity of their appreciation. And in that sea of faces, she saw the one person who mattered the most, Lily. Her granddaughter was on her feet, jumping up and down with unbridled joy, her small hands clapping furiously. The look of pure pride on Lily's face was enough to bring a flood of emotions rushing to the surface. In that moment, Mary knew that no matter what the outcome of the competition, she had already won something far more valuable: Lily's unwavering belief in her. Mary stepped off the stage, her legs trembling slightly. Backstage, the other contestants congratulated her, but their voices seemed distant. All she could think about was how far she had come. Just a few weeks ago, she had been sitting in her quiet house, doubting whether she even had the right to chase this dream. And now here she was, standing among people who had been moved by her story, by her voice. As Mary made her way through the crowd, Lily came running up to her, her arms wide open. "Grandma, you were amazing," she cried, throwing herself into Mary's embrace. "I knew you could do it." Mary held her granddaughter close, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it nearly took her breath away. In Lily's eyes, she could see her younger self, the girl who had once believed in the power of dreams, who had dared to imagine a life beyond the confines of her small town. And now, thanks to Lily, that girl had returned. But the road ahead was not yet finished. Mary still had more auditions to attend, more challenges to face. The competition was growing fiercer with each round. And while the applause tonight had been overwhelming, there were still many hurdles left to overcome. Yet somehow, the weight of those challenges didn't seem as heavy anymore. With Lily by her side, Mary felt an unshakable sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her dream. It was about showing her granddaughter that it was possible to rise above doubt and fear, to pursue what mattered most in life, no matter the obstacles. In the following days, Mary's routine shifted once again. Every evening, after the dishes had been washed and the house had fallen quiet, Mary would rehearse in her small living room. Sometimes, she sang the same songs over and over, fine-tuning each note and lyric until they felt just right. Other times, she would experiment with new melodies, letting her voice soar and fall with the rhythm of her emotions. Lily was always there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her eyes wide with admiration. Often, she would join in, her sweet, young voice blending with Mary's in a harmony that was far from perfect, but filled with love and connection. These moments were sacred to Mary. They were a reminder that this journey, while difficult, was also filled with beauty. It wasn't just about reaching the end. It was about every step along the way, every moment shared with the people she loved. In those quiet, intimate rehearsals, Mary felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. No matter what happened in the competition, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the next audition loomed closer, Mary felt the familiar pangs of anxiety returning. But this time, they were tempered by something far more powerful, a newfound belief in herself. She had already come so far, and with Lily's love and support, she was determined to keep going, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains as Mary stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she had worn to every audition. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the upcoming performance, but from the growing sense of uncertainty about how she would get there. The final audition was only a day away, and without reliable transportation, it seemed as though everything was unraveling. She had spent the last few days racking her brain for solutions, but nothing seemed viable. Buses were unreliable, cabs too expensive, and despite Lily's endless suggestions and optimistic ideas, Mary could feel her hope waning. Still, she couldn't bring herself to admit defeat, especially not after all the sacrifices she'd made. The weight of that realization settled heavily on her shoulders. Could it be that after coming this far, her dream would be dashed by something as simple as transportation? As she brushed her gray hair back, ready to face another day of rehearsals, Lily burst into the room. an envelope clutched tightly in her small hands. "Grandma, look, it's from Aunt Susan," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. Mary blinked, surprised by the name. Susan? It had been so long since they had spoken properly, and Mary hadn't expected to hear from her, especially not after their strained interactions in the past. With trembling hands, she took the envelope from Lily and carefully opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in Susan's neat, familiar handwriting. "Dear Mom, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. Lily told me about the singing competition, and I'm so proud of you for chasing your dream after all these years. I know we haven't been in touch much, and I regret that. I want to help you get to your final audition, so I'm sending this to cover your transportation and anything else you might need. You deserve this chance. Love, Susan." Mary's breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the check that accompanied the letter. It was more than enough to cover the cost of a car service to the theater and even to ease some of her financial worries. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the enormity of what this gesture meant. Susan had not only offered financial support, but she had reached out in a way that hinted at reconciliation, a chance to rebuild the fragile relationship between them. Lily's face lit up with joy as she watched her grandmother's reaction. "I knew something good would happen. Grandma, now you can make it to the performance," she beamed, her energy contagious. Mary knelt down and pulled Lily into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been my biggest supporter through all of this. I don't know what I'd do without you." With renewed determination, Mary quickly arranged for a car service to take her to the theater the next day. As she and Lily sat together in the living room that evening, the air between them was filled with quiet excitement. It wasn't just about the final audition anymore. It was about the realization that Mary's journey, both as a singer and as a mother, was far from over. There was still time to heal old wounds, to reconnect with family, and to achieve dreams long thought forgotten. The next morning, as the car pulled up in front of their house, Mary felt a sense of peace wash over her. She and Lily climbed inside, hands clasped tightly together as they made their way through the busy streets of the city. The skyline loomed ahead, a symbol of the journey Mary had undertaken, a journey not just toward her dream, but toward reconciling with the people she loved. For the first time in weeks, the anxiety that had been gnawing at her disappeared. She had everything she needed now: her voice, her granddaughter's unwavering belief, and the love of a daughter who had finally reached out. This time, when Mary stepped onto the stage, she knew she wasn't standing there alone. The competition grew fiercer with each round, and Mary's life felt like a whirlwind. Every day, she balanced between her rehearsals and the quiet responsibilities that filled her home: cooking, cleaning, and keeping her modest life in order. But underneath the surface of those everyday tasks, there was an unspoken strain: the mounting costs of pursuing her dream. Mary had stretched every dollar as far as it could go, but there were limits. With each trip into the city for rehearsals, new expenses piled up: transportation, wardrobe adjustments, even meals away from home. Despite the applause and admiration she had received from her initial audition, the financial weight pressed down on her. Mary had already sold her television, and now she found herself sitting at her kitchen table late into the night, staring at a dwindling budget that barely covered the essentials. There were moments when her pride kept her from reaching out to her children for help. Though they loved her, Mary knew they had their own lives to manage, and asking for financial support felt like admitting defeat. She didn't want to be seen as a burden or risk reigniting their concerns that she was chasing an unrealistic dream. As the grand finale approached, the stress weighed heavily on her mind. Then, one morning, the final blow came. She received a notice from the metro company that her usual train route into the city would be delayed for maintenance on the day of her final audition. Panic swept over her. Without reliable transportation, how would she make it to the most important performance of her life? A taxi would be far too expensive, and relying on the city bus system felt too risky. If she missed that audition, all the sacrifices she'd made would be for nothing. What am I going to do? Mary whispered to herself as she sat in her small kitchen, her heart heavy with fear. The weight of everything she'd been fighting for seemed suddenly fragile. like it could all slip away with one missed bus or a late train. But as always, Lily overheard her grandmother's distress and sprang into action. "We could take a cab," she suggested, her voice filled with hope and excitement. Mary shook her head gently, the corners of her mouth lifting in a tired smile. "A cab would cost too much." "Sweetheart," she replied, her voice heavy with resignation. "Well, what about the bus? We could catch it early." Lily persisted, refusing to let go of her belief in a solution. Mary sighed, knowing the city buses were often unreliable, especially with the number of transfers she'd have to make. Every option seemed blocked, and with each passing day, the weight of the situation pressed down harder. Mary didn't want to disappoint Lily, and more than anything, she didn't want to disappoint herself. Still, as days ticked closer to the audition, Mary's anxiety grew. The train delay felt like an insurmountable obstacle. But just when it seemed like hope was fading, Lily had another idea. "Why don't we ask Aunt Susan?" she suggested one afternoon, her face bright with determination. The mention of Mary's estranged daughter, Susan, made Mary's heart skip a beat. Susan had always been distant, living far away, focused on her career, and they hadn't spoken much in recent years. The last time they talked was when Mary had briefly mentioned the competition over the phone, and Susan had responded with polite indifference. Mary doubted Susan would be interested in helping now, especially with the strained relationship between them. "I don't want to bother your Aunt Susan." "Sweetheart," Mary said softly, gently brushing a strand of Lily's hair away from her face. "She's got her own life to worry about." But Lily, ever persistent, wasn't deterred. "You never know, Grandma," she insisted. "Maybe she'll want to help if she knows how important this is to you." Mary smiled at Lily's optimism, but doubt still lingered. Asking for help, especially from Susan, felt like exposing her vulnerability, and Mary had spent a lifetime protecting her children from seeing her weaknesses. Yet, as the final audition date crept closer, the idea of reaching out to Susan began to take root in her mind. Could it be that Susan, despite the distance between them, would understand the importance of this dream? There was only one way to find out. As the car navigated through the bustling streets of the city, Mary felt her heart flutter with anticipation. The theater loomed ahead, its grand marquee gleaming in the morning sun. Today wasn't just another audition. It was the culmination of a lifetime of hope and struggle. Sitting next to her, Lily's small hand grasped Mary's tightly, a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. Mary glanced out the window, taking in the sights of the city that had, in so many ways, been the backdrop of this new chapter in her life. When they arrived at the theater, the buzz of energy hit Mary like a wave. Contestants and their families crowded the entrance, adjusting costumes, practicing lines, and sharing nervous glances. This time, though, Mary wasn't overwhelmed by it. She had been here before, had felt the same nerves and doubts. But now, standing on the cusp of her final performance, those emotions felt different, less daunting, more manageable. The love and support she carried with her, from Lily and even Susan, had fortified her spirit. Backstage, as she waited for her turn, Mary sat quietly in a corner, her mind swirling with thoughts. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. But it wasn't fear that filled her now. It was a deep sense of gratitude. She had come so far, had broken free from the routines that once confined her. This dream, long buried beneath the obligations of life, had resurfaced in the most unexpected of ways. And here she was, living it. Lily, standing close by, leaned in and whispered, "You're going to be amazing, Grandma." "I know it." Mary smiled, warmth spreading through her chest at the sight of her granddaughter's beaming face. Lily's unwavering belief had been her anchor throughout this journey, a constant reminder that it was never too late to reach for the stars. When Mary's name was finally called, she stood up, her legs a little unsteady, but her heart steady with purpose. The lights on the stage were bright, just as they had been during her previous auditions. But this time Mary wasn't afraid. She walked to the center, the audience a blur of faces she could barely make out, and let the silence wash over her. The music began, soft and familiar, and Mary closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting herself sink into the melody. She could feel the years of joy, pain, love, and loss all swirling together in the notes. When she opened her mouth to sing, it wasn't just a song she was offering to the audience. It was her life, her story. Each word was laced with emotion, every note filled with the weight of her experiences. Her voice, though not as youthful as it once was, carried a depth that none of the younger contestants could match. It was the voice of a woman who had lived, who had endured, and who had loved deeply. And as she sang, Mary felt herself rise above the stage, no longer concerned about the competition or the judges' opinions. She was singing for herself, for Lily, for all the dreams that had once seemed impossible. The song came to an end, and for a moment, there was only silence. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then growing into a roar that filled the entire theater. Mary blinked back tears as she took in the scene before her, an audience on their feet, clapping and cheering. In the front row, Lily stood with her arms raised in victory, her face shining with pride. Mary had done it. She had not only chased her dream, she had caught it. And in that moment, she realized something even more important. The journey she had taken, filled with love, empathy, and the courage to dream, was the true prize. Whatever happened next, Mary knew she had already won. As the applause thundered through the theater, Mary stood at the center of the stage, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and joy. The roar of the crowd was overwhelming, but amidst the sea of faces, her gaze fell upon Lily, whose smile lit up the room like a beacon of hope. For Mary, the love reflected in her granddaughter's eyes was the true reward for everything she had endured. This moment wasn't just about the competition. It was about the power of connection, of love, and the dreams they had shared. Backstage, the flurry of congratulations and praise from fellow contestants and staff felt like a dream. Yet, it wasn't the trophies or accolades that filled Mary's heart. Instead, it was the realization that she had finally lived her truth through her voice, her story, and her perseverance. For the first time in a long while, Mary felt seen, not as an aging woman with a forgotten dream, but as a person whose life experiences had shaped something powerful. But the night wasn't over yet. There was still the announcement of the winner. And while Mary had long since realized that she had already achieved what she set out to do, there was a quiet anticipation as the host took to the stage, holding the envelope with the final results. Standing among the other contestants, Mary glanced down at Lily, who was clutching her hand with excitement. "No matter what happens, Grandma, you were the best," Lily whispered, her voice filled with certainty. Mary squeezed her granddaughter's hand, feeling a wave of love wash over her. It was a love that had carried her through every doubt, every struggle, and had now brought her to this very moment. The host's voice echoed through the theater, thanking everyone for an incredible evening. Then, with a pause for dramatic effect, he opened the envelope and announced, "And the winner of this year's citywide talent competition is Mary Anderson." For a split second, Mary couldn't believe what she had heard. The words hung in the air as the reality slowly sank in. Then, all at once, Lily screamed in joy and threw her arms around Mary, and the floodgates opened. Mary had won. After all the years of pushing her dreams aside, after all the doubt and sacrifice, she had done it. Tears streamed down Mary's face as she stepped forward to accept the trophy. The applause was deafening, but all she could think about was the journey that had brought her here. It wasn't just about the recognition. It was about proving to herself that it was never too late to follow a dream. And as she looked out into the audience, she spotted a face she hadn't expected to see. Susan. Her daughter stood in the back, her expression one of pride and emotion, something Mary hadn't seen in her for years. Susan hadn't told Mary she was coming, but there she was, watching her mother claim the prize she had so deserved. The distance that had grown between them over the years now felt smaller, the barriers beginning to crumble. Later that night, after the lights had dimmed and the theater had emptied, Susan approached her mother backstage. Her voice was soft, but filled with sincerity. "Mom, I'm sorry I doubted you. I didn't realize how much this meant to you." Mary, her voice trembling with emotion, smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Susan. That means more to me than you know." They embraced, a long overdue hug that began to heal the wounds of years of distance. And in that moment, Mary realized that the greatest victory of all wasn't the trophy or the prize money. It was the restoration of her family, the reconnection with her daughter, and the bond she had strengthened with Lily. As Mary and Lily rode home that night, the trophy resting on Mary's lap, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had chased her dream, but along the way, she had found something even greater: love, forgiveness, and the knowledge that it's never too late to reclaim what truly matters. Whatever came next, Mary knew that she and Lily would face it together, just as they had faced this journey. And as the car rolled through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, Mary smiled to herself, knowing that this was only the beginning of something beautiful. The morning after the competition felt like waking up in a dream. The events of the previous night replayed in Mary's mind as she stood in her small kitchen, the golden trophy gleaming from its place on the table. Winning the contest had been a surreal, life-changing moment, but it wasn't the trophy that filled Mary with a quiet sense of fulfillment. It was everything else that had come with it: the love, the reconnection, and the sense of belonging that had taken root within her heart. Word of Mary's victory spread quickly through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had barely acknowledged her before now stopped by to congratulate her, their voices filled with admiration. They spoke of how inspiring her story was, of how they couldn't believe someone from their quiet corner of the world had accomplished something so grand. Mary, ever humble, simply smiled and thanked them. But inside, she was moved by the outpouring of support. It wasn't fame she had sought, but rather the feeling that her life, her dreams, and her story had mattered. Lily, of course, was more excited than anyone. That morning, she danced around the house, humming the melody of Mary's performance, her face glowing with pride. "Grandma, you were amazing," she kept repeating, her energy boundless. The two of them sat together, enjoying breakfast and reflecting on everything that had happened. It was a quiet moment, filled with the warmth of love and understanding. In Lily's eyes, Mary was more than just a singer. She was a hero, someone who had taught her that dreams were always worth chasing, no matter the obstacles. As they talked, Mary felt something shift inside her. The victory had not only reignited her passion for singing, but it had also reminded her of the connections that had been dormant for so long. Her relationship with Susan, which had once been strained by distance and misunderstandings, now felt like it was on the path to healing. Susan's support, both emotional and financial, had been a bridge that brought them closer together. And for that, Mary was deeply grateful. Later that afternoon, as Mary prepared a modest lunch, her phone rang. To her surprise, it was Susan on the other end. "Mom, I just wanted to check in." Susan's voice was soft, but the affection in it was unmistakable. "I'm so proud of you. You really showed everyone what you're capable of." Mary smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you, Susan. It means so much to hear you say that." There was a pause on the line, and then Susan added, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about the time we've missed. I don't want that distance between us anymore. I'd like us to start fresh, if you're open to it." Tears pricked at the corners of Mary's eyes. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling. "I'd love that more than anything." The conversation ended with promises to visit soon, and as Mary set the phone down, a sense of peace settled over her. The journey she had been on wasn't just about singing. It was about mending relationships, about finding the courage to open up to those she loved. As the weeks passed, life returned to its usual rhythm, but there was a new joy that colored everything. Every morning, Mary would rehearse a little, not for a competition, but simply because singing had once again become a part of who she was. And every evening, she and Lily would sit together, their voices blending in sweet harmony. Their bond, always strong, had grown even deeper, and Mary knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. The true victory, Mary realized, was not in winning the contest, but in rediscovering the beauty of connection, love, and the courage to never stop dreaming. As the days turned into weeks, the victory that had once seemed so monumental began to settle into the fabric of Mary's daily life. But something profound had shifted. No longer was she the quiet woman living in the shadows of her past responsibilities. She was now someone who had reclaimed her dreams, and in doing so, had rekindled the deep bonds of love that had always existed, waiting to be reignited. Mary and Lily's days were filled with music and laughter. Each morning, the house echoed with the sweet, imperfect harmonies of their voices intertwined. As they continued their tradition of singing together, it was no longer about preparing for a competition. It was about joy. Mary had discovered a newfound sense of peace, knowing that she had proven to herself and to those she loved that it was never too late to chase a dream. But more importantly, she had proven that love and connection were at the heart of every endeavor worth pursuing. One day, as they sat together at the piano, Lily paused and looked up at her grandmother. "Grandma," she said softly, her small fingers resting on the keys. "What's the next big dream?" Mary smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride at the question. It was the same one Lily had asked her the night of the competition, and it had stayed with her ever since. But this time, the answer came easier. "I don't know, darling," Mary replied, her voice filled with gentle laughter. "But whatever it is, I know we'll chase it together." Lily grinned widely, her youthful excitement lighting up the room. To her, the possibilities seemed endless, and that sense of boundless potential was infectious. Mary felt it, too, that spark of energy that came from knowing that life's adventures didn't end at any particular age. They only changed shape, depending on how willing you were to pursue them. The neighborhood had taken note of Mary's transformation as well. She was no longer the quiet widow who lived alone. Neighbors, once distant, began stopping by to talk, drawn by her story of resilience and determination. Many of them spoke about how inspired they were, not just by her victory, but by the way she had dared to dream at a time when most people might have given up. Mary's story had become more than just a personal triumph. It was a symbol of hope for others. It was a reminder that life didn't have to follow a linear path, that there was always room for second chances and new beginnings. And perhaps most importantly, it was a testament to the power of love for family, for oneself, and for the dreams that kept us going, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. One afternoon, as Mary was preparing a simple lunch, she heard a knock on the door. Opening it, she found Susan standing there, her expression softer than it had been in years. "Mom," she said quietly, stepping inside, "I've been thinking a lot about us." Mary gestured for her to sit down, her heart swelling with anticipation. They talked for hours, not just about the past, but about the future. There was a vulnerability in their conversation that hadn't been there before, an openness that allowed them to bridge the gap that had once separated them. In that moment, Mary realized that the true legacy she was leaving behind wasn't in her singing or the competition. It was in the love she had worked so hard to nurture and rebuild. That evening, as Mary sat by the window with a cup of tea, she reflected on everything that had transpired. She thought about the journey she had taken, not just to the competition, but through life itself. It had been filled with challenges, heartbreak, and sacrifices, but it had also been filled with moments of deep joy, especially the one she shared with Lily and, now, with Susan. In her heart, Mary knew that she had more dreams to chase, more paths to follow. But whatever the future held, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her this far. She would face it with love, with empathy, and with the unshakable belief that it was never too late to dream. As autumn turned to winter, the rhythm of Mary's life settled into a peaceful cadence, filled with music, family, and reflection. The victory from the competition still glowed brightly in her memory, but it was what followed that mattered most to her now. She had rebuilt the bridges with her daughter Susan, strengthened her bond with Lily, and found new friendships in her neighborhood. Life, once marked by solitude and routine, was now a vibrant tapestry woven with love and connection. One evening, as Mary sat by the fire, she reflected on how far she had come. It wasn't just the competition that had changed her, it was everything that had led to that moment. She thought of the years she had spent quietly tending to the needs of her family, letting her own dreams slip into the background. She had never regretted raising her children, but there had always been a quiet ache inside her, a longing for something more. And now, at 68, she had finally found it. But the true miracle of her journey wasn't the singing contest or even the trophy. It was the way it had reawakened the connections in her life. Susan had become a regular presence, calling more often, visiting on weekends, and slowly rebuilding the relationship they had lost. There were no grand apologies or declarations, just the quiet work of love, steady, patient, and committed to healing. Lily, too, had changed in subtle ways. The admiration she had for her grandmother had always been there, but now it had grown into something deeper, a respect not just for Mary's talent, but for her courage. Lily knew now that dreams weren't reserved for the young, that they could be pursued at any age, and that the strength it took to follow them was something to be cherished. One evening, as they sat together by the piano, Lily asked, "Grandma, do you think I could do something like you did?" Mary smiled, gently placing her hand on Lily's. "Of course you can, sweetheart. You can do anything if you believe in it and work for it. But always remember, the most important part isn't the goal. It's the love and the people who help you along the way." The fire crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow across the room as they played a quiet duet. Their voices blended together, imperfect but beautiful in their harmony. For Mary, these moments with Lily were her true legacy, the passing of dreams, love, and the courage to reach for something bigger than yourself. As the weeks passed, Mary continued to sing, not for audiences or judges, but for the simple joy of it. She would hum as she cleaned the house, sing softly while tending to her garden, and share songs with neighbors who had come to adore her story. Music had once been her escape, a way to express what she couldn't say. But now, it was her way of connecting with herself, with those she loved, and with the world around her. And though Mary had fulfilled her long-held dream, she knew this wasn't the end. There would always be more to discover, more ways to grow. She had learned that life's greatest adventures often began when you least expected them, and that it was love and empathy that made those adventures worth taking. In the quiet of her small house, surrounded by the love she had fought for, Mary felt complete. The journey to this moment had been long and winding, filled with doubt and difficulty. But in the end, it was love above all else that had carried her through. And with that knowledge, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready. As she drifted off to sleep that night, her dreams were no longer of stages and applause. They were of Lily's smile, of Susan's laughter, of a life well lived and a heart full of joy. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey through Mary Anderson's story, a tale of love, resilience, and the power of pursuing dreams at any age. We hope her courage and unwavering spirit have inspired you to reflect on your own dreams and the connections that shape our lives. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who may need a reminder that it's never too late to chase what matters most.